Hello and welcome to Hear Her Voice. I'm Lauren Whitmore, and in this podcast I'm celebrating the incredible range of artistry and talent of women in music. Across the series, I'm chatting to some very special guests as we enjoy the songs, albums and lyrics from some of the most iconic women in music through the decades. Today my theme is breaking the mould, how female artists have used their songs and their music to express their identity and to go against the grain. We look back with awe to the late, great Dusty Springfield, who not only had a voice which we will forever remember, she was an early champion of LGBTQ+ and human rights. Since then, women from across the musical genres have taken up that baton. I mean, we've got Patti Smith, Grace Jones, Debbie Harry, and Bette Ditto. I mean, they've all attempted to break moulds and defy female stereotypes in their own unique ways. These are a class of artists who don't just own their identity, they wear it with pride. In this episode, I speak to Lauren Mayberry from CHVRCHES. Lauren is the lead vocalist of a band which has gone from the Glasgow indie scene to rule the world. She speaks to me about surviving and thriving as a female frontwoman.
Even in early interviews, they would always ask Ian and Martin how they write everything, and they would ask me about like hair products. At that time, I was like, I don't want to be in ASOS magazine while the guys get to be in NME. Like that's not how I want to do this.
But first, let's hear from the wonderful Amy Lamé. Amy's made music her life and work. And she's been a long-time champion of LGBTQ+ rights, using music as a platform. Firstly, through her work as a writer, presenter and DJ, and also via her pioneering club night, Ducky. In 2016, she was appointed London's Night Czar by London Mayor Sadiq Khan, where she's been tasked with promoting London's nightlife both in the UK and internationally. I know she's a huge Dusty Springfield fan, so I wanted to ask her about Dusty and the other women in music she holds up as icons. Remember, you can hear all of today's featured tracks and more at our Hear Her Voice Break the Mould playlist, available on Spotify. You can find the link in our show notes. Enjoy. Amy, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, thanks. Yep.
Good.
Came here on the bus and feeling bright and breezy, ready to talk about women in music.
Because we have so much to talk about, Amy. We're going to talk about women in music who have broken the mould. But before we kick off, I want to ask you about what you were listening to when you were growing up. So you grew up, you in New Jersey? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in a small coastal working class town in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I guess like most kids, it's like whatever records your parents had lying around. Mm-hmm. So my mom always had loads of like Mamas and Papas albums, and she was into the Zombies and stuff. So, you know, that's my earliest memory of music. But then when I was 10, my uncle bought me 2 albums for Christmas. This changed my life. They were Donna Summer's On the Radio and Blondie's Parallel Lines. Okay.
What a great uncle.
I know. He's still amazing. But, you know, having those 2 albums at the age of 10 and thinking, oh my, I mean, every photograph of me after that, you know, receiving those as a gift was me in front of the stereo with those giant sort of 70s headphones on, just completely glued to the music. And I think that was so important because they're 2 incredibly powerful women with very strong voices. And that I just remember staring at the cover of Parallel Lines, you know, and Debbie Harry's there on the front cover with her.
I have it on my wall, actually, that album.
You know it. So it's like her hands on her hips, her legs, you know, so she's in a very kind of powerful, strong position there. All the guys are behind her. You know who's boss. And I thought, I want this, you know, I want more of this. This is incredible.
Except for someone maybe like Debbie Harry, it was probably a lot of men at that time, a lot of male musicians. Was that something that you were kind of aware of or thought about, or?
I was probably a feminist when I came out of the womb, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine that it would have passed me by.
Yeah.
But I think also for women at that time in music, it was very difficult to forge your own identity and to be in a band. Like there were lots of female singers who were singing other people's material or interpreting songs or whatever, but very few
rock stars
that were like, like, I don't know. I think about the Go-Go's, for example, who were writing, performing, you know, producing, like doing all of their own stuff.
Yeah.
With that pop sensibility.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful. You know, same with Blondie, headed up by Debbie Harry. She had her guys behind her, but you had no no doubt who was the boss.
Yeah.
And so I think that has changed now. Mm-hmm. There's a wider variety of women, creative women across all genres that are able to forge not just their own voices, but their own musicality, their own talents. One artist I feel really sad about that passed away far too young is someone like Mama Cass, from Mamas and the Papas, who had such an incredible voice and was so gifted at a time when there was so much oppression for women in the 60s. She was ostracized from the band for being fat, even though Cass was the only one who could sing. I mean, we're going to be talking about an artist who has really, broken that mold, certainly around weight and identity and everything.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually, there was a few songs that I want to talk about from the playlist that we put together for this episode of Breaking the Mold. Who do you want to talk about first?
Well, shall we talk about Beth Ditto first?
I think so.
Just because it
of everything
leads
we're
on
talking
nicely.
about.
Yeah.
So the feature track we want to talk about now is Fire by Beth Ditto. 2017 was the year. Let's hear a little.
What's hard as hell to sing, believe you cold. I'm a believer, my word's as good as gold. But walk on a fine line might not need to hold. Get up, if you want my love. Get up, if you want my love.
That was Fire by Beth Ditto. And I think there's so much meaning behind this song because this was the opening song on Beth's first solo album, having split from Gossip in 2016. What a strong song. Talk to me about why you chose this, Amy.
Well, first of all, I love Beth Ditto. I love everything about Beth Ditto, but I think Gossip changed so many people's lives through their music, and everyone was waiting to see what Beth was going to do next. And then she came out with this song, and it's like, whoa. I mean, talk about a big statement. And to hear her voice there almost kind of like really stripped back in a way, like the music seemed really stripped back, and we're used to these kind of big bangers and dance floor classics and things from her band before. So I love this track because it lets us listen to a different side of Beth.
I love as well with music, a lot of music, so like love songs. This is, if you want my love, you get up.
Yeah.
You get up and you get my love.
Yeah.
Which is a different kind of spin on what most songs are written about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would expect nothing less from her. But, she's always broken the mold with everything that she's done, whether it's her vocal support for LGBTQ plus issues, her support for feminism, just being out as a queer woman herself, as a fat woman, as a working class woman. It's like all of these things that you don't really get to glimpse in, if you make it big in music. And she didn't just break the mold. I mean, they didn't even have one for her in the first place. There's no doubt that being an incredibly gifted artist like she is also takes a toll, and if you're outspoken, you're going to have problems. But, she's pushed forward. And as a result, her fans, myself included, are incredibly fierce and protective of her and love her and would listen and buy like pretty much whatever she put out.
I want to kind of strip back some of these lyrics because it kind of starts off slow and it builds up this momentum. I'm just going to read out some of the lyrics. Hands too burned, sitting on the side of the road. Ain't gonna, an honest feeling in my bones. Felt like a fever, came on like a stone. But what I felt, it can't be helped no more. And then let's get up. And it's this momentum. And she really uses the power of words to. You're building that momentum throughout the whole song.
I think it's also a testament to her Southern upbringing with that kind of like, all right, we're bringing you in, and then there's going to be a big rabble-rousing moment. It's almost like she's
rallying up everybody,
and and saying this is me. If you, like you say, if you want my love, you're going to have to stand up for it. You're going to have to make yourself known. Like, this isn't stuff that I just dole out to anybody. That's very powerful.
So in 1995, you started putting on your club night Ducky on a Saturday night at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern in London. When it first started, where was your mindset? What was happening?
Yeah, well, at the time, LGBTQ plus clubs were very male dominated, and they were dominated by one type of music, and that was house music, happy handbag house. And, you know, the idea that you could be a queer person and into indie music was just like, what? My friends and I, all we wanted to do was like drink beer and listen to David Bowie and like shuffle around on a dance floor. But there was nowhere we could do that. The background to that, you know, politically was that the UK was a place where we didn't have equality. And so our spaces, you know, our dedicated LGBTQ plus spaces were incredibly important to us then, as they still are now, but even more so then. So we wanted to be able to dance to Blur, David Bowie, The Smiths, snog who we wanted to snog, and not have to.
Did you feel if you were in
it.
another space that, it wasn't safe to do that in other spaces?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's always that risk. I mean, we're talking about, you know, the 90s, and it was a time when you wouldn't walk down the street holding the hand of your partner, let alone kiss them in public. You could, and I had been at the time, physically removed from places for doing exactly that.
By management?
Yes.
So not necessarily people who were going there, actual
No,
by management?
the management saw me kiss my girlfriend on the cheek, actually. It wasn't even a snog. And we were obviously together.
Yeah.
And they said, you're making other people uncomfortable. We need you to leave.
When was this?
Oh, it was in the 90s.
Not so long ago.
No, not so long ago. But the positive flip side of that is that my friends and I got together and we started Ducky. So my friend Simon and I, you know, were the main driving force of that. And the music was at the heart of it. And performance was at the heart of it. And so it stood the test of time. We've been going for 25 years now, still welcoming people that were there on day one, and not just them, but like actually their kids now, which is quite strange. We've had couples meet on the dance floor, gay male couple meet, you know, they're friends with the lesbian couple who met on the dance floor. They go off, they had children together, they bring their kids to the club. Now they're like in their 20s, and I just think, wow, we've created a family. And we have a soundtrack to that family. So that makes me incredibly proud.
I want to talk about the power of songs. We've already talked about Bette Ditto. We have to talk about incredible female artist, Dusty Springfield. We're going to go back to the 60s, 1969, and let's hear a little bit of Son of a Preacher Man.
Billy Ray was a preacher's son, and when his daddy would visit, he'd come along. When they gathered around and started talking, Cousin Billy would take me walking. Out through the backyard we go walking. Then he looked into my eyes. Lord knows to my surprise, the only one who could ever reach me was the son of a preacher man. The only boy who could ever teach me was the son of a preacher man. Yes, he was.
The intro, you can't help but feel the sass straight away. Dusty Springfield there. Originally, it was offered to Aretha Franklin, but at the time she thought it might be a little bit too offensive for that time with the lyrics. Talk to me about what this song means to you.
Well, it's one of those songs that whenever you hear it, you just stop dead in your tracks. I mean, it's so evocative, and the message to me is an interesting one because, of course, we get this narrative, okay, you know, Billy Ray was the preacher's son, the only one who could ever teach me, the only one who could ever reach, you know, and it's unexpected because you'd expect the preacher's son to be the kind of good, upstanding young man.
Sensible.
And what Dusty is saying here is, I think we all need to look beyond our face value. Exactly. And so from that perspective and looking at Dusty's personal life, it makes a lot of sense. And Dusty is one of those singers that she had this unparalleled gift for bringing emotion and sending that emotion out in her voice. And this song for me is almost like a proxy. It's like a proxy almost for her own life.
In terms of breaking the mould, which is the title of this episode, the Guardian obituary said of Dusty, the only white woman singer worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as the great divas of 1960s soul music. So, I mean, Dusty was up there with the Aretha Franklins, the Gladys Knights, the Dionne Warwick, the Mary Wells. And for Dusty to be, amongst those incredible women, she had to fight and work and be the best.
Yeah, she really did. And she suffered for it. Her struggles with drug and alcohol addiction were, well known. And Dusty didn't just stand up for herself either. And I think that that's one of the reasons why, for example, there were so many other artists and Black artists that respected her so much. She was deported from South Africa because she went on tour to South Africa in 1964 and refused to play to segregated audiences. And she did some mixed concerts. The authorities marched her off stage, took her to her hotel, seized her passports and the passports of the band, and put them on the next plane out. And she was very vocal about what happened. And so when we look at what's happening now, and sort of allies standing up for people who maybe don't have a voice, Dusty was one of those people from the very beginning. And I think that's incredibly powerful. Her band was always racially integrated at a time when even in the UK, it was very controversial. And so she was pushing boundaries, all sorts of boundaries of sexuality, of gender, of race. And again, somebody who, died way before their time.
I'd like to dig a little deeper into Dusty Springfield's remarkable life and incredible career. So let's hear from our resident music expert. The other Laura is in the house. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Laura. So for me, the beauty of Dusty Springfield's story is how she transformed herself because of pop music, just like millions of people did because of hers. As a girl, she was playing Mary Isabel Catherine Bernadette O'Brien, born into an Irish family who lived in London. Dusty was a bit of a tomboy, and she got her nickname from playing football in the streets. She also loved music, the whole family did, and developed a particular love of American jazz. I can't think of much footage from pop history that I would love to see more than a 12-year-old Dusty heading off to a record shop across town to record a cover of the Irving Berlin song When the Midnight Choo-Choo Train Leaves for Alabama. I'm so charmed by this image of a young girl who may not ever have left the country, trundling off to town to sing about the American South. But I'm also in awe of it as a bold statement of self. This is where I see myself. This is who I want to be. As a teenager, Dusty joined a few bands and had some success. The hits she had with the Springfields in the early 60s didn't leave much of a lasting impression. They took a trip to Nashville in search for an authentic Southern sound, which kind of backfired for the band because Dusty came home from the States obsessed not with country, but with R&B. Now her solo career had its direction. Dusty continued her remarkable self-creation into that historic look of hers. She wore her mascara so thick it became a running joke among her collaborators. And her black eyeliner was not so much a wing in the sense of an elegant sparrow or a hummingbird, but as hefty as the arms of a Boeing 747. This thick black halo painted almost up to her eyebrows. Maybe while she was in Nashville, she had picked up on the wisdom that the higher the hair, the closer to God, and so she teased that blonde beehive skywards. Her look became synonymous with the 60s, but it's also dramatically extra, so absurd and extreme that maybe this former tomboy was subtly winking at the constructions of femininity, at least if she could actually wink under that dead weight of mascara. Anyway, it's no surprise to learn that she is a major influence on any number of drag queens. Dusty was clearly obsessed with perfecting the nuances of her self-presentation. Unusually for a female artist of the 60s, or the 70s, or most of the 80s for that matter, she self-produced her music and was notorious for her painstaking approach. If it sounded better to her to sing in an echoey stairwell than a posh studio, as she did for the towering, desolate You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, then she was absolutely going to. And that song, by the way, became her only UK #1 single, which is surprising when we think about how commercially and culturally dominant Dusty was throughout the 60s. Songs like I Just Don't Know What to Do With Myself and Son of a Preacher Man established Dusty as the leading star of blue-eyed soul, which is the term for white artists performing R&B and soul. But Dusty refused to just coast on the artistry of the black musicians she loved so much, whose music was often segregated from the mainstream pop charts. Here, she was clear that she was not her own creation, but actually deeply indebted to the stars of Motown, artists like the Supremes, Stevie Wonder, Smokey Robinson and Martha and the Vandellas. She even introduced these acts to the UK, hosting a TV special to show them off. Sometimes, she once said, if she was lucky, one of the Vandellas would oversleep and she got to step in, an occasion she once called the biggest thrill of her life. I respect Dusty's respect for her influences so much. By that point, she was adored by millions and she could always revel in being the main event if she wanted to. But Dusty had clearly never forgotten how it felt to be a fan, for pop music to offer the potential for breaking the mould, for transformation, the kind that starts subtle revolutions.
Do you remember when you first heard Dusty?
Well, yeah, I think anybody who first hears Dusty, you're convinced that
It's a black voice.
it's a
It
black
sounds soulful.
voice. Yeah. And then, you realize, and it's like, she's some Irish lady from North London who went to Catholic school and put on a big beehive wig, and you're just like, whoa.
Again, not going with face value and not doing the music that you're expected to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing about Dusty as well is I think she had a good sense of humor in that she took all of that hyper femininity to the nth degree. Mm-hmm. You see her in those incredibly long beaded gowns and big hair and big eyelashes, and you look now at young women and the way they're styling themselves. It's not that far. She's really still
and
influencing us.
You can do that as well. I think sometimes we think to be a feminist, you can't look a certain way. You can't want to play around with hair and makeup. You can. Like Dolly Parton is someone who's kind of proved that before and has been knocked because of how she dresses. And she puts people right in their place. Yeah. And it's okay to play around with things like that if it's what you want to do, to explore your own sense of creativity.
Absolutely. I love Dolly Parton's quote. She says, it takes a lot of money to look this cheap.
Again, she's got that humor,
Yeah. Self-effacing. And with Dusty, I think she also struggled in her life because of her sexual identity and expectations at the time for women. It was very constrictive for women just generally. And to be outed or to kind of, say, actually my partner is female would be the death of her career forever and ever. Amen. And so I think that must have been incredibly stressful for her because she was such a huge star.
Tell me a little bit about her coming out or wanting to come out or what happened.
Yeah, I mean, there was she did an interview for one of the popular newspapers of the day back in the 60s, and sort of was asked a question about her love life, as was
every single woman.
It's like, who are you dating? Who are you going out? Who's your husband? All of that nonsense. And she said, oh, well, it would be just as easy for me to fall in love with a woman as it would be a man. Stop press, drop mic, everything. And so this was effectively her coming out. And although she never kind of said the lesbian word, the L word or anything like that, it was just merely exploring the idea that put her in a lot of difficulty. And as a result, her career just took a nosedive.
After she made those comments.
Yeah. And then she moved to Amsterdam. She had a lot of difficulties with drugs and alcohol. It was a very dark time for her. And it wasn't until the mid-'80s when the Pet Shop Boys asked Dusty to appear with them on their track, What Have I Done to Deserve This?, that brought her to a whole new audience who probably had never even heard of her before. But it just wasn't the same. And this came from telling the truth, her truth. And that's the sad thing.
She a role model for you?
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm not doing too well. following in her footsteps, but she's
But
definitely
about creating that space by using the voice, by what power you have to create a space, bringing people together, talking about issues, celebrating music.
I think also realizing that, we've all got our own identities. I'm a queer woman. I've got the battles that I want to fight, but also realizing that my battles also align with other battles and that we're stronger together. And so as a white woman, I try to be the best anti-racist ally I can be. Dusty was doing that. And I think that the way she approached it of this, I've got this power, I've got this voice, I'm doing these concerts. You want to see me, it's got to be mixed. And look what happened to her. So taking those risks, and obviously my risks are on a different scale from hers, but it is inspiration because you can see, like, if you do stand up to the bullies and if you do stand up for what is right, in the end, it's seen and you're remembered.
You're absolutely right. Amy, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
My next guest, Lauren Mayberry, is the lead vocalist in the Scottish synth pop band CHVRCHES. Now, the band formed in 2011, and 2 years later, they released their Recover EP, which included the breakthrough hit, The Mother We Share. Their debut studio album, The Bones of What You Believe, was released in 2013, elevating them into the sound of 2013, a list by the BBC. When CHVRCHES released a playlist of their influences on Apple Music, it featured plenty of female artists who have broken the mould in their own unique ways, including Bjork and Annie Lennox. When I spoke to Lauren, she and the band were touring their fourth album, Screen Violence, in the States. Lauren has called it a semi-concept album about male violence. Intriguing. She spoke to me from her New York hotel room about her musical inspirations, the women she looks up to, as well as surviving and thriving as the frontwoman in the band. Lauren, hello, how are you?
I am good, thank you. Yes, I am on a very squeaky chair, I've just noticed, but it's the
good
only
to know.
chair in this
It's the
hotel
chair.
room. So if you hear
It's the
creaking,
chair.
it's not my spirit, it's just the chair.
You are in a hotel because you are in the middle of a US tour of Screen Violence. Where are you at the moment?
We're in New York, so it feels weird to be in New York and not really able to do anything, but that's the rules of the tour. It's just that you need to be in the venue or in the hotel room. You can't really go anywhere outside of that, just for the COVID safety of the situation.
Yeah, so you're in your band bubble.
Yes, just the four of us.
For a lot of musicians, there was a gap of no tours happening in the last few years. And even though, yes, the protocols are stricter, how is it to kind of be back up there on stage?
It's been really special because playing live was always such a huge part of the band. We've always toured pretty hard, and I don't know, we always kind of try and talk about it as most of the time when you get that wake-up call in your career, it's after it's too late, sort of,
You take it for granted.
Yeah, so it was helpful to get a bit of a slap in the face, for better or worse, and realise that you should appreciate things. And I do think there's a different energy to shows this time when we've gone out. Maybe, I like to believe it's a cross-section between us making a decent record and just people really wanting live music and to experience songs that matter to them in that space.
Lauren, we're here today to celebrate women in music and female artistry, and I kind of want to take you back, your first memories of music growing up and what women spoke to you.
Well, neither of my parents are musicians, but there was always so much music playing in the house, and my mum remains a huge Whitney Houston fan, so there was a lot of listening to Whitney when we were kids. And I remember being adamant for a very long time that the Bodyguard soundtrack was the best album of all time. And that kind of big pop diva stuff is so hard to do, but so hard to make emotional. And I remember being so obsessed with Whitney Houston. I would watch videos, have a VHS of her music videos and just watch the way she was singing and how she moved her mouth and all those things. And yeah, to me, I'm she's just one of a kind.
This episode, as I said, it's called Breaking the Mould. And I'm just wondering for you, what artists broke the mold? You talked to me about Whitney Houston, the first time you hear her voice, I remember the first time I heard her voice as a kid, I'm like, what is this? Like, this is, I've never heard anything like it. One person. I don't think I've ever heard anyone sing like that, ever. For you, I guess, what does breaking the mould mean for you?
I almost wonder if in the abstract I couldn't even describe it, but in the moment you always know. Like, I remember hearing Alanis Morissette for the first time when I was a kid and just being like, what the hell?
That Jagged Little Pill album, oh my.
Yeah, her voice is so iconic because she was using it so differently to anybody in that space, that popular space. And I think, yeah, somebody like her or PJ Harvey. PJ Harvey, I think, is a massive inspiration because she's just, no one can disrespect PJ Harvey, but I'm sure they've tried. She's made records where it's the noisiest, scariest, least feminine thing in some ways, but it is like a lot of the rage in those early records to me feels completely feminine, and it's a very specific kind of female storytelling that she's doing, and then she can go off and write weird murder ballads about something else, and I just think that sounds like the most freeing way to be as an artist, that she's making whatever she wants to make at whatever point. And yeah, I just love her.
Being a female front person of a band, did you ever feel like you were under extra scrutiny from the media in particular?
I think at the very beginning of the band, because I worked a little bit in media before Churches started, I was not prepared for what was going to happen, but I think I could sort of see the conversation around the band starting to happen, and then I got really panicked and paranoid that this kind of separation was going to happen to me. And even in early interviews, they would always ask Ian and Martin how they write everything, and they would ask me about like hair products, and I was like, why do I spend all my time doing this if this is what it's going to be? So then I think in a way maybe we went too far the other way, where I was like, I want to shut down any kind of discussion or promo around anything to do with the fact that I am female. I want to be taken on equal level with the guys. And I do think in a way that made it harder for us to access a female fan base because we shut off those things. But I was so conscious that at that time I was like, I don't want to be in ASOS magazine while the guys get to be in NME. Like, that's not how I want to do this. But yeah, I can kind of look at pictures of the first record and trace the mental health path as I go through it. I'm like, there you were fine and you'd never really spoken to any journalists, so you didn't know. Yeah. And then I start wearing less and less makeup and wearing baggier and baggier clothes and eating less and less. Because I'm like, oh yeah, you're conscious that like you are being looked at and you don't want to be looked
judged.
At. And if you make it less likely to be commented on and you hide yourself more and more, then people will leave you alone. And didn't actually work, really. So I think it was helpful once we got to the end of the first record to have some time off and be like, okay, I should try and use this time to recalibrate your relationship with what that means. But because, we're incredibly lucky. This doesn't happen for very many people, but especially not people where we come from. Yeah, it was a learning curve for sure.
Is dressing up and getting made up an important part of the persona you channel on stage? And I mean, does that help you at all with breaking that mold?
Yes, 100%. And I think that's the thing that I've tried to find a better balance with going forward, because right at the very first Churches gigs, I would put on face paint, and I love Annie Lennox and Grace Jones and Karen O and all those women who use those things as part of their art. Like, your physicality is part of your art. But then I became conscious that other people were saying, oh, well, your physical appearance is... They're not taking it as part of your performance or your storytelling. It's because you're a woman, then your body is a thing. It's not part of the...
So it's sexualized.
Yeah. And I do think that's something that I've had to work on a lot, because I don't know how to sit with certain parts of it, because you're like, well, it's not like I get up in the morning and I'm like, I'll just go out wearing whatever and do this gig. I don't really care. Because I do think about that stuff, but then I'm like, am I thinking about it too much?
You probably overthink it. Yeah.
I don't know. And I get stuck. But I think at this point, I like the fact that when we do shows, there's girls and guys that come to the show and they've done the kind of glittery face paint makeup that we do. And I like the idea that it can be something expressive, that you can feel a part of something rather than excluded from it.
Have any other women in music supported you in your career?
Quite early in the band, Shirley Manson from Garbage reached out to us, and she didn't have to do that. And obviously, I adore Shirley. Even before this, I was like, wow, especially that she's from Scotland and she has always blazed her own trail, and she was in situations that I can't imagine being in. Like, I think about what life's like now, and I can't imagine what that was like for her at that time. But she was incredibly kind, and she was just like, I've run this race before. If you ever want to talk about anything, you can reach out to me. And yeah, she's been very kind over the years with things. And sometimes she can just articulate exactly the issue that I'm trying to discuss. And she's like, oh, okay, so this is what's happening with this and this, and these are your choices. So I'm like, oh, but that's incredibly kind. Yeah. She doesn't need to do that. And I'm conscious that whenever we have the opportunity for things
for the
like
next
that,
people coming
I would
through.
like to pay that. Just because it's hard enough.
Yeah,
Because it's hard enough without just, there is no HR, there's no, oh, I'll just Google what I should do in this work situation. It doesn't really apply sometimes. So, yes, helpful to have wiser women to ask these things.
I want to talk, Lauren, about Church's breakthrough hit, The Mother We Share. Tell me a little bit about this song, the meaning behind it, and any notable lyrics you want to discuss.
It's interesting because people have so many different interpretations of what that lyric means. And I guess for me, it was never about literal mothers. I always take it to be about just whatever the thing is that keeps you together, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And a maternal figure, and that doesn't have to be a mother. It's just,
And I think, but I don't know, over the course of time, I'm like, there was writing about mothers in the last album. I'm like, why are we always writing about these things? And I've noticed that there's always a lot of water imagery and imagery about body parts, not in a macabre way, but it's always like hands, eyes. And I wonder, I'm like, maybe at some point I should ask somebody about this. I'm like, what do all these things mean? But who knows? I guess that's the great thing about writing and making any kind of music or art, is that you don't really know necessarily consciously at the time what you're talking about sometimes.
That's so interesting, because I always think with songs, you know, to all those people who come and watch you, each song can be interpreted in so many ways. One song might trigger someone to a bad memory, or to someone else to like a happy memory. And I always think, but as a deep down, the actual singer or the songwriter will know what it means. I'm like, actually, they mightn't even know what it means, because it might change. The meaning might change for them.
Yeah, and sometimes you have you're conscious that this is exactly what this song is about, but there's certain lines that you're not quite sure of until after the fact. Like the record we just put out, when we were getting the masters back, I was like, oh, there's kind of a lot of looping back and recurring things that weave in and out. It
happens subconsciously, do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I remember getting the master back and be like, oh, the opening line of one song is like, writing a book on how to stay conscious when you drown. And then in another song, it's like, closing the book I never meant to start. And I was like, oh, I didn't realise that at the time. And I'm like, those recurring themes.
Yeah.
For this record, I definitely knew I wanted there to be consistent imagery, and it was supposed to be cinematic and referencing horror stuff and female tropes in horror. But I wasn't necessarily conscious of pulling the threads that tightly.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, the subconscious was doing the work anyway, so it's all fine.
You've called your new album Screen Violence, and I know you've said it's a semi-concept album about male violence. Can you tell us more about the concept and how it came about?
Well, Screen Violence was actually a proposed band name that we never used.
Really?
Yeah. So we talked about it a lot at the time. And then the reason we didn't choose it was because we thought it was maybe too retro, given that the band already sounded quite 80s. Yeah. We were like, maybe that's going to be too much. But we thought, well, maybe we'll call an EP that or something. Yeah. And we were touring. It was towards the end of the touring, the third album, I found this list of band names. And I looked at this list of things and I was like, yes, that'll be a great, just like working title for something. And I knew that the guys would connect with it because they love all the soundtracks to those kind of films from that era, the John Carpenter, Badalamenti stuff. And for me, at the beginning, I think I tricked myself into thinking I would write something that's like purely concept and it's nothing to do with me, because I don't really want to dig into anything in here at this time, because if you pull one thread, the whole thing might unravel. So I was like, I can't do that. But after writing a few songs, I was like, oh, it's a metaphor. And then I like the idea that I'm like, you could take all this imagery and build this kind of backdrop, but still tell personal stories in it. And I think that's sometimes the best way to tell the truth, is to put it through a lens of a little bit of fiction or an artifice. That means you can say, if I just put a big list of sad things, I think that wouldn't be terribly fun for people to listen to. And I think the best thing I could say about the record is that it does feel quite escapist in some ways. Like it's saying stuff that's quite brutal in some ways, but it does feel escapist because it has this concept around it. And making that record not knowing if we could tour meant we were a lot more conscious of the visuals and the imagery. And if people are getting this record in a world where they still can't go outside, how can you help make this an escapist thing for them? They can go get lost in the record and they can feel cathartic, or they can feel very sad, or they can feel whatever they want to feel. But yeah, I think that's the nicest thing to do, and just to build a little world to experience the record in.
It seems like you're making a pretty direct comment on the way society talks about and views violence against women.
And I do feel like there's a kind of voyeuristic secondhand obsession with violence against women. And people in news stories don't know how to handle those things. They talk about the grotesque act rather than why is this happening? And then what happens after that? What happens to the woman after that? And I think for me that's when I look at this record, I'm like, well, this record is the answer to that. So if all the times that people ask me, what's that like? What can we do about online trolling? And I'm like, why do you keep saying online trolling? It's not like it just exists online. It's men doing this online. That's not like, it's about a mentality. And I feel like we just talked about it to death. It got to a point where I was like, oh man, if this question comes up in another interview, and then it's just moved on from after 10 seconds. I think people don't necessarily realize. They're like, oh, death threats, rape threats. Does that make you feel bad? Discuss that. Okay, so the next tour. And you're like, what is happening? It's just a weird reality to live in. And yeah, I think it was helpful for me to process some of those things on the record. And there's some heavy stuff, but I think for me it's been great playing it live because you see how much catharsis, but hope and perseverance there is in that.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something a lot of women can hopefully connect with, is that you need to get out and express the poison, otherwise you'll go insane. But then you want to be hopeful and you want to find a way to move forward and keep swinging. And yeah, that's what's been nice about the shows, especially seeing groups of women coming together. I like it when they get to the one that's their song.
I love this. Remember this one? Yeah.
Yes, here we go, ladies. This one's for you.
One thing I want to ask you, Lauren, and I think, like, as a woman, especially when you're, a lead singer of a really successful band, there's a huge strength in that. And I feel someone who, I feel very independent, I feel very strong, but I also feel like shit and weak as fuck and all these other emotions sometimes, which I hate, especially as a female. And it's a minefield sometimes to kind of grasp it. Even simple things when like today, I can't even look at the news sometimes because there's always a woman attacked somewhere in London. I live in London, and I'm someone who very much is happy to speak their mind, but won't go for a walk with a dog if it gets dark outside. And that's just accepted. And it's only every now and then I'm kind of like, how messed up is this world that we live in, where I don't know if you get that with like the guys that you work with and stuff, that they can do things that you can't do. And I find I have these two sides where like I want to be strong, but I also just feel really weak all the time and scared.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely something we've talked about in the band over the course of time, was me trying to make it clear to people. I'm like, well, during the day, if you want, when we're at a venue, when there's security threats around the band, if you want, you can still go to the guitar shop. You don't have to think twice about it. I don't leave the building because we are not a wealthy enough band to afford security that's not connected to the building. So you could be the most famous woman in the world, but it doesn't, no amount of success or privilege will really free you from those
fears.
Things. Obviously you're able, there's a luxury in that is not afforded to women in other situations, but yeah, at the end of the day, those things aren't changing. And yeah, it's interesting when people talk about, especially because what I present as the persona is strength and take no shit and don't do this and don't you listen to them, do what you want.
Yeah.
But then so many of the songs don't exist without, as you say, like weakness and feeling weak and feeling regretful and having done things you wish you hadn't, or accepted things you wish you hadn't. I would say there's one in every 20 CHVRCHES songs is fuck off. And then every 19 other ones being like, and then this happened and it was so bad. So, the balance is there.
What a great breakdown of your album and your music career. You talk about like Garbage when they first came out and what they probably had to deal with compared to what CHVRCHES is dealing with to then maybe the next. Is it getting better? Do you see it getting better, or is it just new things to deal with like, not saying online trolling, but there's just new platforms to kind of to deal with and new different sides to it that it changes rather than it necessarily getting better for women?
I think hopefully people who are coming into entertainment now have a better understanding of what social media is going to be like. I feel like I'm 34 now, and I remember being on tour and our manager being like, you guys should get this thing called Instagram. And we were like, we should get that. But like not knowing what it was. And I don't think we fully understood what it was going to entail because it was such
I still don't fully understand.
Such an evolving thing. And I think somebody 10 years younger than me will have a better understanding of how you want to use that and what you don't want to look at and how you don't want to engage with it and how you can use it in a way that's creative. But even seeing stuff that's being playlisted or booked, it does feel like people are making a conscious effort with booking. And there's just so many cool young female artists making so many different kinds of music at this point. I feel like that's really encouraging. And even a few years ago, I remember seeing news stories of festival bookers getting in the shit for their lineups not being very diverse, and then them being like, we booked churches though. And I was like, don't bring me into this. Like, and then,
don't be,
you know, but then also looking at that, I was like, oh, congratulations, you booked a band that has one woman in it. 1/3 of the band is female. It's a straight white woman, and you booked me, but they made it sound like you booked me as a favour, but you booked me because I sell you good tickets. And then you're using that to cover your back because you couldn't find any other female artists to book. That seems quite odd to me. And I don't think that that excuse is valid anymore because there's been so many great artists coming through in the last few years. So I'm hopeful that will evolve. And then they can book me to open for them when I'm a little old granny.
Before I let you go, Lauren, and thank you so much. I really love this chat. And we've talked about different women in music already. You've talked about some of the women you listened to growing up and influences. But the one question I ask everyone, hail the Queen. Who is the greatest female musician of all time?
Well, I'm not just saying this because I can see her in the background of your room. But Debbie Harry, man. Debbie Harry has to be my number one. I love her. And I always love that she was so involved and invested in other people's art, and she was so invested in the visual art community and fashion and design. And when she made her solo album, she was like, I'm going to dye my hair brown and make a weird album. I'm going to have Geiger do the cover art. And she's just always done whatever it is that she wanted to do. And such an iconic voice and iconic image. And Debbie for the win.
I think for an episode that's about breaking the mold, I think Debbie Harry is the perfect person to choose.
Yes.
Perfect.
Love her.
Love her. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all for this episode. Remember, you can listen to all the songs featured in today's episode at the Hear Her Voice Breaking the Mold playlist on Spotify. And if you like what you've heard and want to hear more, please do like and subscribe to the Hear Her Voice podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. Next time on Hear Her Voice, I'll be talking about the sisterhood with my very special guests, Lucy Porter and Nicola Roberts. Until next time, take care.